Okay, this video is how to be funny. A viewer asked me to make a video about how to be funny, and I thought that's kind of a good idea because that's something I used to actually care about. What happened was when I was in college at Stanford, all I did was wrestle and study. The old joke is 9 out of 10 California girls are pretty and the 10th one goes to Stanford. Stanford tended to recruit a lot of good-looking student athlete type guys. And because of that, the guys tended to be real good looking and athletic in comparison with the women. And so the women, it's like if you have a daughter you're trying to get married, send her to Stanford or a place like Stanford. Because I'm telling you, there would be like 10 guys for every attractive woman. It was rather remarkable. I never seen anything like it in my life. And so I went from being a real popular, great athlete at my high school to all of a sudden I'm at Stanford where they think wrestlers are scumbags. There's letters to the newspaper that all scholarships should be taken away from wrestlers and football players. They're just a bunch of thugs. Okay. And then there were no parties. There'd be like my freshman year, I don't even remember going to a single party. My later years, one party every 4 months or 6 months. It was unbelievable how bad the social life was. Like I said, I had some friends that became professional athletes. They didn't have girlfriends at Stanford. That's how it was. It was rather unbelievably bad for social stuff. And then, being a social idiot that I am, I went to med school in a med school that was in a ghetto. A lot of med schools are in bad neighborhoods, but that also meant there were zero social events for the entire year. So I went from having a great social life, great family, great girlfriend, a dream of a life, to being unbelievably lonely with no hope of it ever getting better. And so the joke though is when I came back home from med school, I would sometimes see my brothers, and my brothers are kind of like super good looking Rico Suave guys. And it really was about this big of a contrast. One of my brothers is real tall and good looking and all the girls are in love with him. The other one, not so tall, but he's still super good looking. He's a world champion athlete. The women were all in love with my two brothers. Okay, like I said before, I don't know if you've seen that video. I could never let a girlfriend or a girl that I like see my brothers because they would immediately go, your brother's gorgeous. And they would fall in love with my brother. So unless I'd slept with her and she was committed to me, I would not allow a girl I'm dating to see my brothers. So anyways, the reason I showed this picture here, so here I was a nerd that just wrestles and studies all the time. And I came back home to my hometown then after college. And I lost track of all my high school friends. There was no email in those days. There were no cell phones in those days. I never collected anybody's phone numbers or anything. I lost track of everybody. And then I got to study all the time in med school. So anyways, my family started making fun of me and calling me names like Rain Man and other names. And I learned pretty fast. Nobody wants to talk about books. Nobody wants to talk about academic stuff. I had a few academic friends at Stanford, and we would really discuss advanced scientific topics. We were interested in that. But when I came back home, there was nobody to talk to about anything academic or about anything in a book. So I learned pretty fast that didn't work for social purposes. And I didn't go out that much, but the few times that I did, my brother, as a joke, took it on part for him to sort of train me to be more social again. And they used to always tease me about Rain Man. First you say hello, then you say, how you doing, how you doing? So anyways, this is pretty much what it was like. So then I noticed that I could memorize all these jokes pretty easy. I would watch the comedians and I would memorize their routines. And then I started to write down all their routines in a book. Back then, computers were just becoming a common thing. Nobody used a computer too much in those days. So I wrote everything in a book. Later on, I transferred it all to a Word file on my computer. I've got thousands of jokes stored up. And the 1980s were a good decade. 1990s were still decent. Back then, you could joke nonstop. Whereas nowadays, all these phony scumbags, they don't let anybody talk. And society is becoming very conformist and stupid. So anyways, this is where it all came from, though. And I ended up collecting thousands of jokes. Sam Kinison was the funniest comedian. He's probably the funniest comedian who ever lived. He has the best ability to change his voice, his delivery. He doesn't have that much verbal material. But what he's got the best delivery. He's the funniest comedian who ever lived. Okay, the older you get as a guy, the more you start to like Rodney Dangerfield. He's like the patron saint of married guys. And, La Contessa, for example, is very funny. His audiobooks are funny. So I read all his books, watched all his routines, and I loved them. They're great. Okay, a typical Rodney Dangerfield joke is something like, what's the difference between having an arranged marriage versus marrying for love? With an arranged marriage, you can spend the rest of your life blaming your parents instead of yourself, okay? So a lot of jokes are like that. They turn on a fulcrum and they reverse back to the opposite of what you expected, okay? And that's actually like something called the anatomy of a joke. I was going to go over that in my next one because I'll go over that in my next one, the anatomy of a joke, because I have a little more information on that. But that's typical of a joke. It basically starts down one path and there's a surprise where you turn down a different path, like using the second meaning of a word. Okay, now here's some contemporary comedian. And like for anything, usually you want to get good at anything. What do? You find the people who are great at it and you start studying them. Like a great artist, the way they learn is they study the masters of the past and they try to imitate their drawings. And then once they understand what they're doing, then they start to innovate and make their own style and everything. But you got to learn the basics first, study the great ones, and then start to get. So if you want to be funny, watch all the funny comedians. This guy, John Zerka, he's crazy, but he's very funny. And he calls himself the last masculine Christian. And the one about the Ukrainian lady that, was out at one of these Fresh and Fit conferences is very funny. He starts teasing her about how she's abandoned her poor husband who's out on the front. Sam Kinison, just watch Jesus Was Never Married. That's, I think, was funniest thing. He's got a lot of really funny stuff. Eddie Murphy, Delirious and Raw, Rodney Dangerfield, anything on marriage. Steve Martin has some really good stuff. The movie The Jerk was really funny. George Carlin has some good routines. Sometimes, though, he's too bitter and nasty, but sometimes he's funny. Chris Rock is pretty good on relationships. He was back and good, when he first started. Now, then he kind of, went down the tubes. Chappelle's actually pretty funny. A lot of times I like Chappelle. I forgot to put his name on here. Bill Cosby. We loved Bill Cosby when we were young. He used to talk about his family and how, there'd be a dog turn on the floor in the TV room. Everyone would see it. No one would pick it up. Martin Lawrence kind of reminds me a little bit of Chris Rock or Carlin. He can be too nasty, too much of a jerk, but sometimes when he's on, he's very funny. Dice Clay was very funny when he started out. He was like a phenomenon when he started out. He's real funny. And then he kind of deteriorated too. He didn't have enough material to keep sustaining himself. Rodney Dangerfield did a good job of sustaining his comedy. Sam Kinison became an alcoholic, died in a car crash. But Rodney Dangerfield, because he was sort of clever, the smartest of them, he kept developing new vocabulary. He had a lot of good material. As far as women in general aren't as funny as men, and I think it's because a woman doesn't need to be funny. A woman is attractive just because she's a woman. And men, we like women, 10 times as much as they like us. I think I mentioned before, at the dating sites, the women say only 15% of men are attractive. The men say 85% of women are attractive. We just like them. And if you walk down a hallway, what you'll see in a corporation at work, you'll see a man walks down the hallway like this. Hey, is there anybody I can talk to? Do I know anybody? I've been sitting in my cubicle all day. I'm bored. I'm lonely. Whereas a woman walks down the hallway like this, staring at her phone. Don't you waste my time, you nice guy losers. I got shit to do today. Okay, women are very good at deflecting people. Oh yeah, I'll talk to you later. I gotta go. They're very good at deflecting attention. With a man, it's different. We're used to not getting any attention, so we try harder to have a joke or a funny story for each day or something. So we have to be entertaining because we're not intrinsically very attractive. When a man goes missing, no one cares. When a woman's missing, it's on the front page. Nobody cares too much about men. They're expendable. They put men on the front line. Okay, so because of that, though, men are much more used to showing off and telling jokes. All right. Also, men can take a joke better than women. If you because a guy, when you're with your friends, that's what you do with your friends. You insult each other in a playful way. That's a sign that you're friends, that you can insult each other in a playful way. Versus with a woman, a lot of women get very offended if you make fun of them. They take it personally and they're offended. They don't take it just as a joke. I mean, maybe some do. I know some are like that. And it's fun to be with a woman who you can joke with. But in general, and I've seen how boys play when they talk with each other, constant, like two boys playing a video. They're constantly insulting each other. You suck, you're in the wrong spot, blah, 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 blah. Whereas a woman, they don't insult each other anywhere near as much. Okay, so anyways, be that as it may. All right, here's just a couple quotes on humor. G.K. Chesterton. Humor always has in it some idea of the humorist himself being at a disadvantage, caught in the entanglements and contradictions of life. Yeah, quite often the joke is the fact that expectations are not met by reality. Reality is a disappointment, a loss of innocence. Humor works well with something that has a clear, solid identity but can withstand joking and distortion and disproportion, like a caricature. And like the church is a good example of that. It can handle it. It can take it. And men can take being made fun of in general better. Judy Carter, the comedian, said, funny works well when you talk about something that annoys you. Yeah, it's funny for us to see somebody who we like who's annoyed. Kinison had the great delivery, wide vocal range, rapidly changed from a whisper to a shout. And that contrast makes it funny. Let's see here. Emotional crescendo, like of his voice. All that stuff was great. When he goes slow and fast, and sometimes he screams but not too loud. When the way the good comedians, you see, they tend to walk around a lot because your eyes follow motion. It makes them more interesting. They use the microphone as a prop, the microphone stand as a prop. Profanity can work a lot of times. It's a prefix to something else, saying that effing this, effing that. Self-deprecation is good in humor, taboo, sex, all that stuff. Kinison was sort of like what Handel is to classical music, this sudden change in tempo, crescendo, and volume with a stunning, comment. Most of the best jokes are short and fast. It has to work immediately. That's like P.J. O'Rourke says that, and that's true. You can't be verbose and drawn out with comedy. It should be quick. I think a good thing, like Bill Murray, just a playful attitude. Like you're talking to your family. You can just be at ease, give each other the benefit of the doubt, and just joke. What's funny? Surprise is often funny. Something that's sort of a minor violation of a PC, political correctness thing. A character who doesn't give up in the face of terrible odds, like Don Quixote. Satire can be kind of rough, but it can be very funny, like Jonathan Swift in Gulliver's Travel. Irony with extreme opposites. You can be a caricature of a character like Bugs Bunny, a trickster, but big, strong opposites are good. And a lot of times what works well is when the characters have a different script. Like they both have a different interpretation of the current situation, the current reality, and they go by their own script. And you, the audience, recognize that they're going by their own script and what they're saying makes sense in that context. But because their scripts are different, they can't understand each other. That's a typical form of humor in comedy. All right, well, anyways, that's part one of comedy. I'll make a part two to that one later. Hope